Okay, we'll get going. So good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone's feeling invigorated after yesterday's sessions and a good night's sleep. So we'll get straight in, and it's good to see so many people here. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for the last talk. I suspect there's a lot of themes and discussions that maybe Anna can tease out from the second part of our conversation here today. So essentially, you're probably wondering why there's two people on the stage, two companies here. The reason is that over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been collaborating closely. That's Lifescience Dynamics and BMS in the area of this strategic, competitive dashboarding solution. So essentially, we've worked quite closely. It's been quite symbiotic in terms of how we've worked together. And we're going to be talking about the solution that we've got today here on the slides. So just touching on our agenda today, I'm going to be picking up points 1, 2, and 3, talking about some of the background, generic background to what this solution is and how it's used, and the architecture of the solution. And then I'm going to be handing over to Anna to cover off the latter part of the slides here. So brief introductions. Myself, I'm Steve Dunn. I'm head of the consulting practice at Lifescience Dynamics. I'm pleased to be joined by Anna from BMS, Anna Newnham, and she has had a very pivotal role in the synthesis of the solution and tool we see today. So Anna is head of the CI practice in a certain area, she's an executive director within BMS. Quite locally in Philly, I understand. Just before we begin, I mean, clearly we have to communicate the fact that anything we transmit to you today is not formal advice or anything related to any recommendations for action. And also, you'll understand for confidentiality, client confidentiality, we will not be presenting you live data, but we'll have schematics of what the dashboard will look like or would look like if you wanted to see that. We're more than happy to have dialogue after the session if you want to know a little bit more as to some of the practical aspects of how the solution is put together. So let's start today let's step back into what do we mean by innovation, and especially how it relates to CI data analysis. So one key theme I want to bring out today is what can we learn from some key serial innovators. And one of the important things that was considered by Thomas Edison was really about this idea of recombining novel ideas in different ways, not necessarily creating the innovation themselves, the primary innovation, but actually resynthesizing, reformatting things that they have seen around them. So you may know Thomas Edison from his role in the industrialization of the light bulb, electricity transmission, and a very, very large, lucrative patent portfolio. So how does that interweave with CI data analytics and the field that we're all present in? I've tried to encapsulate with these words and phrases some of the themes that we have around innovation. And in here, you'll notice there are a couple of parts to talk about new technology leverage, disruptive technology, and clearly they are major themes within our environment. Beyond that, many of the other words and phrases are connected with this idea of re-engineering, joining dots, moving forward with what we already have. And the second part of this is really the focus of our conversation today. So, digital tool ideation, really the creative part of what we're talking about here. This is quite a busy diagram, but it sets out the challenge, this very, very large and massive challenge around the amount of data we have in the field of CI intelligence. On the right-hand side, you will see in the dark blue that it's really like the analogy is an onion. So we look at the information we have in our own organization here in blue, and from right to left, going from 4 to 1, you've got transferring yourself down to the core of, on the right-hand side, that is your group of competitors. Now, along this pathway, this is not a complete universe of all different types of CI, of course, but it just gives you an idea of this huge, diverse repertoire and the challenge we face looking at the whole universe of competitive intelligence information. So what are our needs in this context? Our needs are to identify, interrogate, distill, visualize, and assimilate. Those are the 5 key things that we need to do in order to get a streamlined data intelligence solution to make optimal strategic decisions. Now, a further challenge really is to focus on, well, what elements of the CI universe do we want to focus on? And here are some examples in a funnel. And you won't be surprised to see various things in here: commercial aspects, strategic aspects, information around clinical trials, media, news, all the typical things. And a very large dashboard will contain all of those elements together to assess the landscape and how it's evolving. Now, clearly what you would ideally want is all of this information to be crystallized together, brought together in a form on one solution platform, and that's what we've created. So turning now to the solution architecture, I want to give you a flavor of what is in this solution. And the solution itself is made of, it's not only a digital platform, but also it's a process. And the two are interwoven and they support one another. And you can't really have a solution without the process and the digital tool acting in concert together. So on the left here, what we have is a visualization of the data flows, as it were, in the digital tool. And on the right, you've got the process human factors on the right-hand side there. So firstly, on the left, we have clearly various pots of raw data in a dispersed way, both structural and non-structured data. And if I just highlight this, so essentially you have all of your data on the top, and that can be in the form of all the different types of data that we've already mentioned. We obviously did some sort of data intelligence engine, the powerhouse of the functionality of the tool. And then what's absolutely pivotal is some kind of an interface, a user interface, which makes things simple for the user. It allows multi-user access over many geographies. And importantly, it's an understandable interface for the data and information. And the data and information is clearly very diverse. It includes text, graphical information, and numbers, graphics, things of that nature. Moving to the right-hand side, there are 3 elements of the manual process, 3 main elements here, which are around data collection, data cleaning, data visualization. A number of these are quite mammoth tasks. I'm sure Anna will explain and provide insight to the experiences of BMS in this regard. The data cleaning one is of specific importance because unless you get the cleaning right, ironing out all the ambiguities in the data, reconciling data sets together into one theme and one source, then clearly there are quite a few issues and problems that can flow downstream into decision making. Finally, the visualization element we've already touched on, which I think is key in terms of once you've got your CI universe of information, having that in a very usable, friendly form that is you can interrogate, and not only it's not like a PowerPoint slide deck where you turn over maybe 100 pages and all the data is there. You actually have a platform with a landing page, and then you've got various buttons to go into commercial, scientific, R&D, all the areas that you want to focus on, and it's completely bespoke in that regard, how we put that together. And then once you go into, say, a commercial area, you can then span out into different discrete areas and interrogate beyond that. So, penultimate slide for me is really this one, and it's really marrying together the 4 or 5 V's of big data and how this solution fits with that. So number 1, clearly we need to handle a very large amount of data, and Anna will describe the amount of data that she's processing through the system. And that's analytical depth and breadth, essentially. 2, variety. We need to have a data accessibility capability and have this a visual nature for the output. Veracity, number 3, is extremely important. It's around the subject matter expertise and the validation, the quality control, all those aspects feeding through in the system. And 4, which is around the output frequency, the velocity of how quickly you can transmit the data slices to your end users. Number 4, again, I think Anna will touch on, and it's really about, well, how much effort needs to be placed up front. You're really displacing the effort that normally happens downstream. You're bringing it all upstream in an efficient way, and clearly that has to be done first before the data can flow easily through to the user groups. And finally, a lot of the critical success factors of this solution are human. They're not tool related, so it's things, as I've mentioned, subject matter expertise, the governance around and the process, and the practical rules, a few rules and guidelines that affect all the users. Importantly, it's about the team collaboration and willingness to share information. So there may be an evolutionary change needed in your organizations to make that happen. And then finally, that this tool needs to evolve with not only from the angle of competitive threats, but also through business requirements which change over time. So without further ado, I will pass over to my colleague, Anna, to complete the slides.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. In the next few minutes, I'm just going to take you through the journey of how this came about, because you'll be surprised to know that this was not actually a stakeholder question. Nobody came to me and asked, Anna, can you create this? So it was really an idea and a gap that I identified in the organization. I was being asked to present company profiles, and in the background, I was going around different data sources, different inputs, and we'll cover this in more detail as I take you through this journey, and putting together these very static reports that have a company profile, including their pipeline, et cetera. So I know that Steve talked about Thomas Edison. I'm not trying to compare myself with Thomas Edison in no means or anything like that. But really the idea behind it was taking, how can we improve on this? So my goal today in the next few minutes is really to challenge all of you, whether you're on the vendor side or on the client side, to really think through. Sometimes you don't have to wait for somebody to come to you with a question, but if you can identify a gap or an opportunity to make an improvement, that within itself, some improvements can be innovation, even if it's a small innovation, but it can make things a little bit better. And I had some surprises as an outcome as well, so that I'll cover in my slides. So in kind of just setting the stage of really the situation, as I kind of led on to, I was being asked to come to workshops, to come to all sorts of other meetings where we talked about what is our competition doing? Give me an overview across multiple indications in a particular therapeutic area of what is the competition doing? What is their strategy? What is their pipeline? What does their sales force look like, et cetera? Tell me everything I need to know to kind of just set the level stage and see where BMS should go. And so one of this was not a struggle, but essentially we had tons of reports, tons of different formats, data fragmentation. There was lots of different formats and variations of reports that said basically essentially the same information. So what's the timing of the most up-to-date reports that we could use. There were some knowledge sharing gaps, especially around The markets, we have a tendency on the client side to focus very much on the worldwide or US, because it's usually the first market where we're launching. So there was some data gaps in terms of the smaller markets, and then obviously it's also quality issues in terms of, again, bringing this all together and making sure that it was in a very concise way. So you can think, at the time I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I'm presenting a multiple page report, how can we do this better? How can I make sure that folks across the organization have access to, even if they're in R&D or if they're in commercial or medical, if they just want to know, what is our competition doing, where can they go to do that in a very easy and concise way. So basically, there was a lot going into this, and my idea behind it was really, how can I make this one interactive? I didn't want, and what I mean by interactive, it's somewhat dynamic. So so that it wasn't like a static report, something that you could click, you could sort, you could filter, and also again bringing together all that information. And then also kind of create a summary that really highlighted, where the key points across the entire gamut. So this was a key thing for me because, you can look at a really nice, beautiful dashboard with tons of data points, but what does it all mean? Like, what should be my key, if I'm, a senior leader, like, what do I need to take away? Like, what is the key points that I need to have in the back of my head about the particular competitor? So that was a really key thing for me, and I also wanted to make it visual, because nobody wants to sit there and read through a bunch of bullet points and figure out what it does all mean, right? So so that was really like my vision for how this should be coming together. So I reached out to Lifescience Dynamics, and they took on this challenge. I don't think that this existed prior to me coming to them, so we kind of worked really together, and it was a labor of love in a sense, because in essence, there was a lot of decisions that had to go into this. What are we going to include? What are we going to exclude? How should this look? This doesn't work right. How can we filter this? How can we make it better? There was a lot of iterations. There was a lot of work. It took months, quite honestly. But it's something that I was passionate about because I felt that it was really going to add some value and kind of, again, bringing lots and lots of data and making it really digestible. And I know we always talk about making strategic decisions, and not necessarily I'm expecting that this is going to drive any strategic decisions, but it will definitely give the background that a lot of the leadership and others need in terms of understanding, again, where's our competition headed, what are they doing, so that can think about, like, well, where should BMS go? So we ended up, obviously, with one interactive platform and multiple dashboards. There was, we ended up with only 4 key competitors. And again, these are decisions that we made along the way. Tons of visualizations. We had multiple data points. And on average, we'll talk about the user end, about 150 more end users on the back end. The platform, again, takes on, this is just an example. I don't want us to get stuck on what the components were. But just think through, again, if this kind of sparks any ideas, what would you like to see in a dashboard like that? Like what, I know a lot of you or some of you may potentially use things like portals where you can do searches. So this is not a portal per se, right? So this is an actual new dashboard that you can use, again, to really get those insights that will hopefully guide you in your decisions in the future. So, but we included all sorts of things. Some of them are on this list, some of them are not on this list. And but you can kind of get the idea that it can be as big or as small as you'd like, and the dynamics behind it, varied significantly. But the key thing too, I should mention here, is I didn't want it to just be like, okay, let's talk about competitor X and be competitor X. The other thing I wanted to do is make sure that we're actually kind of in certain cases putting the competitors and comparing them against each other in a visual manner, right? Because we don't always just say, okay, X is doing this and Y is doing that. What does that all mean? Because we don't work in a silo, right? The markets are across the competitors. So I really wanted to see, like, well, where's the competition going overall at a very, very high level. So let me take you through, with any innovation, with any I guess, new design, there are some things to consider, some practical, I guess, pros and cons. Certainly from a pro perspective, there was several advantages to creating this. There was certainly a level of integration across multiple sources of information. It was time-saving, not so much from the upfront work, because obviously there was a lot of manual inputs that went into this, but really more from a perspective of if somebody came to me and asked me, okay, can you give me a presentation on X company or X number of companies, I already had something together that I could use and pull from. So that was time saving for me, and it was obviously time saving for the end user, right? Because they can go and access and see and get the information very easily. Simplification, it goes without saying. Obviously, we're taking lots of things easy to use. That was another key thing about the platform. I didn't want it to be complicated. Very simple. Click the dot, takes you to a different dashboard. Sort it through. It doesn't require any kind of training per se. And then efficiency, obviously, again, kind of goes hand in hand with all the other points here. So while I'm not going to go through all these data points, there were some hurdles or potential watch outs in pulling this together. So one key thing was certainly that there are unique needs within the organization, and one size does not fit all. So I'm putting a dashboard, you're kind of challenged, right? Because you're not going to be able to include everything. I mean, that would take months probably to pull together. And so, we still got requests of, oh, can we have this view? Can we filter things this other way? Or, this visualization is not necessarily, working for me. And, can you do it, with something else? So there's still iterations and improvements that can be made. The other thing that I would say is the data process, the gathering of the process. We talked a lot about it being manual. So we're still not in the era where we can technically, take this information and put it in, and automatically through machine learning or artificial intelligence, it picks the right points and puts it into the dashboard. So there's a lot of manual, which can be time consuming, from the perspective of investment. So that was a key consideration. And then from a continuous development perspective, we talked about obviously the time component, but certainly budget considerations are always a factor, especially obviously as you think through this. If you're going to adopt something similar, you have to scale it up or scale it down depending on budget, because obviously the more you include, the more you do, the more time you need, the more budget you will need. So finally, before I pass it back to Steve, one of the things that really surprised me about this was, one, how the markets actually, the smaller markets in the organization took to this. So we ended up with users across more than 38 countries, and that really surprised me. I really didn't, when I pulled this together, I really didn't know I was going to have that kind of level of impact. The one thing that also surprised me, but not to some degree was necessarily something that I necessarily could control, is that usability kind of went out with the, because we only reported on a quarterly basis, and then we change it to like twice a year. But initially, every time a new dashboard would come out, obviously, the usability would went up, and then it would go down again, and then would go up again when the new version would come out. So it is a somewhat static aspect of it, in a sense that there is, it's a snapshot in time. So between the time that the dashboard is issued to the time the next version is issued, you obviously going to have, things that happened that are not captured. And so it's a snapshot in time. Hopefully, and my goal was really, well, strategy doesn't change that much, right? I mean, your pipeline might change, data might come out, things like that. So the key consideration here is, what should be the right time gap for you? So with that, I will pass it to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Perfect. So what I'll do now is just conclude with the key takeaways, and then we'll go directly into Q&A. So key takeaways, there's only 8 of them, 4 by 4 really. So on the digital tools side on the left here, on the left, so we've got 4 points here just to take home in terms of 1, this is highly bespoke and flexible and scalable, and will adapt to modular needs. So for example, if you want to have something which is more frequently delivered into your organization with slightly less depth of information, then that is possible, as well as having a detailed solution. This does create one version of the truth. However, if we don't have full user access in different functionalities and functions across businesses, there may be multiple versions of the truth. But clearly, this allows one version of the truth if you have a user capture, which is appropriate for that. Point 3, visual knowledge sharing. That's very, very important. People have to access this in a visual way and in a simple way and an intuitive way. 4, multi-user accessibility, that goes without saying, needs to access your whole functional platform across organizations and entities. Moving on to the process side, on the right, clearly this is a process plus tool. There's an investment in human effort to make it as functionally and productively valuable as we would want. Governance guidelines and teaming, there's a necessary oversight onto the process. So clearly that has to be put in place. And then very importantly, last 2 points, data quality validation is pivotal. You want to make sure you've got quality information in, which will allow you to make quality decisions. And then finally, as Anna mentioned just now, one size doesn't always fit all, and there needs to be some trade-offs and bargaining discussion amongst the stakeholders in order to reach a solution that everyone is comfortable with. So that really concludes our key takeaways, and we'll move to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really curious about, you showed a little bit of users and them using it, so you had some kind of feedback based on people using but I'm curious if you've heard anything, any feedback, maybe someone that said, hey, I never had access to something like this before, this is amazing, that would be great. Or maybe a surprising use case where someone used the dashboard in a way that you didn't expect. And the reason I'm asking the question is I think sometimes when you put these things together, getting folks to come to it and use it sometimes is the hardest part, and continually to come back. But I'm just curious if you've heard some feedback from your stakeholders on the usability.
I also asked the question just because it's a very similar question. I also noticed that your user profile, the graphic, it didn't decline. When you had your peaks, every peak was about the same, which suggested to me a high degree of enthusiasm to go back in. So it's basically the same question, but I did observe, I thought, if that's representative data, that everybody that's interested in logging in is logging in every time it's refreshed.
Really good question. So to answer the first question, I was very surprised by the feedback and the reaction that it was a fantastic platform, and from very high level folks in the organization that provided that feedback. They did not know that we, one, had that resource. Well, this is obviously when we first launched it, or if we get some new people in the organization, they see the release of a version, they reach out with the feedback. And they were just really surprised about the content, particularly, as I mentioned, the summary piece, because it didn't require them to, seep through tons of data points or a full report. They could literally, in like 2 sentences, and this is really the key thing, in 2 sentences, really just kind of see, well, what's X company doing in terms of access? What's the areas company-wide is going into? What's their pipeline going into? What are some of the key events or financials that we have seen from a perspective? So that's the feedback. I was really surprised about the uptake, because again, this was not something that somebody came to me and said, "Oh, Anna, we need something like this in your organization." It wasn't like that. I had this vision of, my manager, who's actually here in the audience, he was like, "Anna, go for it," She gave me the go-ahead, and so it was really nice to be able to have that support. And then when it came out, it really was, I had no idea how it was going to be received, but it was very well received. Yeah.
So maybe similar questions, but so like it was your vision and nobody really asked for it. Did you actually look for someone to do the beta users, or did you just launch without really telling anyone how? Like, I'm so impressed with the number of users. So how did you get that? Was there any partners in it, or you did it?
How did I promote it?
Yeah.
Multiple different ways. Essentially, we have obviously distribution lists. So when we first launched, we launched it out to the entire organization. Essentially, anybody with a BMS email can actually access it. I also did. Like I said, people would provide feedback and have requests, but we promoted it on our portal. It's in our portal. It's in. We have newsletters. So anytime there's a new release, we promote it in the newsletters. I talk about it when I meet key stakeholders. So it kind of was. It's a lot of word of mouth. And I probably could have done a better job of trying to increase the number of users. But again, I didn't know exactly who would be tapping into this. And it's interesting because there are some folks around those 150 users or so that are like power users that actually go into it and refer to it and use some of the data. So it was kind of interesting. Again, the dynamic, it was almost like a trial to see how this is going to pan out. But it worked out great. Yeah. Oh, we're out of time. Sorry. I apologize. Thank you.